Witamy po przerwie. I teraz zapraszamy Państwa
Okay,
serdecznie
so
na
welcome
wykład
after the break.
Damiana
We will
Gałuszki.
like to
Damian
invite you to
jest
the lecture
socjologiem,
by
który
Damian
interesuje
Gałuszka,
się
who is a
grami
sociologist
cyfrowymi,
interested in
asystentem na
digital games,
AGH, doktorantem na
assistant
finiszu, prawda,
at
Panie
the
Damianie?
Technical
Z tego,
University
co
in
kojarzę,
Krakow,
pochodził doktoryjkę
finishing
w
a
ustawiu się nie dało
university.
docisnąć do pozycji
As far as I
doktorantem
know,
na Uniwersytecie Socjalnego
he's
Pomiotu,
writing
autorem
his
publikacji,
PhD
którą
at the
zresztą, jeżeli Państwo
Jagiellonian
sobie wybijecie
University,
w naszym
and
konkursie,
the
jest to publikacja
author
Grawitacja,
of the
zjawisko rodziny, diagnoza
publication
i
that
rekomendacje.
you will be
I
able
Pan
to
Damian
win
Gałuszka
in our
przedstawi wykład
competition.
Gry
Damian
cyfrowe,
Gałuszka
jak
will
je
present
wykorzystać.
the lecture
4 przykłady
Digital
gier, które
Games, how
bogacią
to use them,
edukacyjną codzienność.
in the process of
Zapraszam
learning,
bardzo
examples
serdecznie.
of game that can enrich our educational reality. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Welcome everyone. Thank you for the introduction. Maybe I'm not going to repeat the information. Thank you for the possibility of co-creating this well-prepared conference, an important conference. So I would like to present you my own personal vision of approaching education. I will focus on digital games. Let's move on to the substantive part of my presentation. About the theory, in short, we don't want to overload you with theory, but I think to organize the discussion and to understand the problem, we need to discuss some theoretical aspects, so notions, terms. Using games in education or approach the umbrella term will be here edutainment. We note these words, education and entertainment, edurozrywka in Polish, so connecting, learning or teaching someone with playing games. Of course, games are forms of a structured play, and in the conference's name we have this DGBL, so game-based learning, and this is more narrow notion, so this is about using different forms of game, traditional games, board games, urban games, video games, in the process of learning, or teaching actually. So I will focus on DGBL in my presentation. In short, the use of digital games, very broad approach, mobile, video games, VR games, that games basically that we play on the different devices. Of course, there are some opponents and proponents of different edutainment. Maybe you know Michel Resnick, professor at MIT, a person responsible for many educational projects for legal or Scratch. And Resnick, many years ago, in one of his texts, mentioned that edutainment is not a very good notion. He compares it to the culinary analogy, that this is something boring, that this is not very spicy dish, that we need to spice well. So like education is something boring and mild, and game is just a spice. He doesn't like this approach. Resnick states that we need to combine playing with education. So he proposed the notion of playful learning. So here on the slide you have a lady, a girl who is maybe learning something in VR. So learning something via digital entertainment can be, for example, visiting an international space ship in Oculus, instead of reading about the space station or watching films from the space station on YouTube. Of course, I am associated with a lab of VR research, and I were able to test this application. And really, being able in VR to be like in the vacuum, it's something totally different than watching films on YouTube or just watching photos. We can use VR on physical education lessons. I used to have an experience I wanted to train in VR game, boxing game, actually, and for 2 days, I had really sore muscles. I was writing then my PhD thesis, and I was very, let's say, tired because of writing the PhD. And then when I was fighting with the virtual boxer, I was really, let's say, I did my best. And it was physically exhausting. So VR allows us to be somewhere and also to use our body, our physical abilities. I'm telling you about it because I want you to change your optics on VR and digital games, because it's not something additional. VR games or digital games help us to actually develop our skills, and they are not an addition. The second issue I would like to tell you is the question, why is it worth to play digital games? This is one of the reasons, of many reasons, because digital games engage us in terms of cognitive skills, physical skills, emotional skills. So they engage all aspects. In terms of emotional and cognitive involvement, I would like to refer to example that was described by one of the Paweł Grabarczyk, specialist in gamification. He created this division of casual games and hardcore games, so big titles, mainstream titles, and he said that this division wasn't the best. He offered his own division. So on the spectrum, we have engaging games and non-engaging games. So the games that are often associated with passive entertainment, wasting time, wasting life chances sometimes, or wasting our future, are something that requires from us strength in terms of our intellectual skills. Such games engage our memory, imagination. So it's not only books that develop our imagination. Games don't give us everything on the plate, so the games engage our attention. Immersion was mentioned before, or they help us to go, let's say, into the flow state. It would also helps to learn better, and also games engage our motoric skills. So we need to work with the controller, or sometimes we, in VR, we need to engage our whole body. If we, for example, play Pokemon Go, when the activity is an important part, or is indispensable. The last example of such production would be the Witcher game that replicates the mechanics of moving into the offline and online worlds, and emotions, many different emotions depending on the type of the game, positive emotions, or on the contrary, different emotions when we are I don't know, flabbergasted, surprised, or disgusted with something. So games give us such flexibility. In this way, we can affect ourselves or our students. We would think that in education, games, the best games for education will be engaging games like this war of mine. The game will be probably discussed during the conference because we have the co-creator of the game during the conference. He will be the speaker, and this game is used at the ethics classes, during the ethics classes, to work out some situations from the game, to have an opinion about the situation in the game, and then to draw some conclusions based on our experience. Because if you play the word of mine, you will have such problems. And then we have non-engaging games, such as Angry Birds. They can be also utilized in education. If you look at Angry Birds and education in Google, you will find English sources, even scripts of the lessons. When, for example, Angry Birds was used to explain physics in primary schools. There were even articles written about the methodics of using or applying Angry Birds in explaining children the concept of movement. One of the articles you can see now on the slide, so you can refer to the article, and please believe me, serious calculations, statistical data, of course, a bit simplified. These titles can be used only in primary schools, even if very simplified, in a simplified form.
Kolejny termin, o którym chciałem tutaj wspomnieć, to jest tangential learning. Mówię o tym, ponieważ jest to pojęcie dość rzadko wykorzystywane w Polsce w dyskusjach na temat.
Another term that I would like to discuss broadly is tangential learning, a term that is not commonly used. The term was coined by Floyd and Lloyd. Extra Credits is the channel on YouTube they have managed, they have led for quite some time, and there is a link to one of the films on Extra Credits, and they define that their definition of tangential learning. I tried to translate it, but it's quite difficult to do it. It's a non-formal or passive learning in a way. That's how it can be translated. So they say that when playing, we are showing an interest, entering a game, we're showing an interest in the topic. And then we can transform that into much, much more. They can, for example, they give an example of, I don't know, an occurrence of Excalibur sword in a given game, which can be a motivation for a gamer to get interested in the item and in the whole history of King Arthur and so on. That can also refer to historical items like civilization-based games. And with full encyclopedia that can also motivate to acquire some in-depth knowledge using, let's say, a more professional or more detailed sources about a certain character, certain historical period, and so on. And it not only refers to these historical games, it can also be, I don't know, getting interested in a sport. For example, if a given game, for example, if we like playing FIFA, for example, we might be willing to play soccer a bit more. So they describe it in this particular video. I will copy this link to chat. What I wanted to say in this connected to the slide. In connection to the slide, I would like to refer your attention to the situation when your students already use the game, use some games, play games. And studies show that majority of teenagers, majority of your students play computer games. So my suggestion would be that maybe it's worth not only during the typical classes when you're focusing on implementing the curriculum, but during some extracurricular classes or some extramural classes, you can try to direct your students' attention to these aspects of computer games. If you play the games, maybe you can take a different approach and then look at them differently. Maybe you can look into the computer game in a broader, the topic that is discussed in a computer game in a broader perspective. You can look for more detailed information. So again, I'm sure that most of your students play computer game and are passionate about computer games. Use it. Another situation, when you want to use games during your classes, you can, as it was said before, you can use commercial games, for example, Assassin's Creed Unity. This part actually didn't have what appeared later on by Ubisoft, the special educational mode where all the element or the gameplay elements are cut out from the game and replaced by the simulators of ancient Greece or Egypt, because this is what the latter two parts are devoted to. So using this mainstream AAA game, we can inspire our students to talk a bit more about these particular periods of time. But Unity is mentioned here to point your attention to using games in another way. A couple of years in France, a certain Parisian photographer, Damien Hypolite, he's also a game designer, he got an interesting idea. He printed screenshots from the game who reflected the certain areas of Paris. The game takes place in the French Revolution times, and he printed out these screenshots and then he compared it to the actual places in Paris. And it was a game, it was a performance, but this can be also a great idea for you as teachers, using games as a cultural language, as a cultural expression. Maybe you can look for Polish notions, for Polish aspects in computer games, and then compare them with reality. Treat it as an entry point to some discussion, as a topic for a thesis or an essay. The possibilities are limitless, of course, depending on your ideas. Another thing, serious games. And again, I'm simplifying the topic. It was mentioned by the first speaker in detail. I'm suggesting here that these serious games are also perfect for being used in the class. Here, an example of one of the important serious games, Peacemaker, a game where you need to show the Israeli and Palestinians their perspective on their own conflict, your perspective on their conflict. So these serious games can also be used, definitely. So if we asked game designers and these hardcore gamers about serious games, they will tell you that, well, basically all the games are serious, right? You can't just divide games into more or less serious. But this definition treats serious game as a secondary goal. Depending on the topic, it can be about some military aspects, religious aspects, political, artistic aspects. These games may refer to emotions, so the games that allow you to empathize with another person, better to understand the situation. For example, that's Dragon Cancer. Also, news games that are ideological tools to influence the perspective or ideas, views of the recipients, gamers in this case, that pertain to current affairs usually, and they reinterpret them in the way that is typical for digital games, digital medium. And then, to finish up this part of my presentation, I wanted to point your attention to the fact that we can use both in our class rooms. We can use both commercial games that would have entertainment as priority, but they have the best potential to immerse the players as best as possible, because they are designed to give the players fun and entertainment and make them spend the most of the time. They have educational value, but this value is hidden, so definitely they would work better in the so-called constructivist approach. When you treat education as accompanying the student, project-based learning, participation in group, and so on. And then the second group, serious games. The priority is not entertainment, and conversely, educational value is overt, not covert. So here, that would work better with the behaviorist approach. So there is a certain idea that we need to transfer to students, to give the students, and then we need to test them on that. So a serious game is a kind of a guidebook for us that allows us for direct learning process, and then commercial game can be treated as a novel. That can be educational, of course, but it requires reading between the lines from us, an effort that we need to want to learn. So of course it's easier to so whether it's easier to use a commercial game or a serious game, well, that's up to the teacher, of course. I would say from the perspective of the teachers would prefer the serious games. However, students would prefer commercial games. So it's up to you then to learn about these commercial games and learn how can they be effectively used in your classes. Moving on. We talked a bit about it at the beginning of our conference, but I would say that this distinction between serious, commercial, and commercial games is blurred. For example, we would have Minecraft, Never Alone, Microsoft Flight Simulator, games that were created to earn money, but work perfectly in educational context. I don't have to tell you about Minecraft, I'm sure. Never Alone is a great indie game, a simple platform-based action game that talks about a mythology, a history, of Inuits, Inuit Indians. Microsoft Flight Simulator is a leading brand in the Microsoft range of games, but also a very advanced flight simulator that can be used for pilots, for future pilots, or develop aviation interests in general. And then a question to you, listeners. Do you know this game? You can answer using the chat. If you want to give me an answer.
Ja mam opóźnienie, więc muszę poczekać.
I have a slight delay, so probably I have to wait for your answers. But if you know that game, just write about it in the chat.
No nie do końca, ale bardzo blisko.
It's not that, but it's very close.
Tutaj pan Tom był bardzo blisko.
Tom was very close. It's called Kolobot, and it was published in 2002, so almost 20 years ago, that combines things that we're trying to do in Minecraft right now. It was used for programming, coding. It also has notions that are typical in pop culture, space exploration, looking for new planets, habitable planets, fighting with aliens or other threats. It allows us to learn programming, but also manipulate different machines, which is used in space engineers, a great game with great educational potential. But I'm mentioning this one because it was recommended by the Ministry of Education as a useful tool for learning algorithms of programming. And almost 20 years later, a group of passionate people, passionate enthusiasts of the game, supported the game without the official game producer, game designer. So you can still use it. But 20 years later, and the question is, did we really do a lot in terms of introducing games into classrooms? Maybe a bit, but I wouldn't say we've experienced any kind of revolution in these 2 decades. So I think there is still room for improvement in this aspect. And it's all up to you, or mostly it's up to you. It's about your perspective, basically. So my suggestion would be, when trying to adjust the digital games into your classrooms, you need to define the age category. And I'm sure Dr. Dominika Urbańska-Galanciak will talk about it, and she represents PEGI in Poland. Then you need to think about the topic of the game. It should be adjusted to the topic, the subject that we want to discuss. Then the style of teaching. So is it constructivist or behaviorist? And then adjusting the serious or commercial game into it, even though I said the distinction is blurred, and I would be flexible about it. Then the game application. It can be used as a space for interaction, if we interact with other people, but also with virtual characters, with symbols, with contents, with mythologies. We can treat the game as a base for discussion or as a project environment, both designing something like in Minecraft, for example, but also when designing elements of the game, a plot, characters, levels, and so on. And then last element that needs to be taken into account, way of assessment. Should it be done within the game or in real, based on work conducted based on the game, as an essay, a presentation, and so on. So I think these steps, and just to finish up, I won't talk about all the games that can be used. I will just show it to you. Games for older. I talked about Minecraft, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, Lyle and the Shadows of War, mobile free game that shows the problems of refugees, and especially in the Syrian context. Depression Quest, a context game, which is again free, which shows perfectly depression and its mechanism. Coffee Noir, a game from Poznań, developed by a Polish company, that can teach you basis of entrepreneurship or economy. Unravel, simple platform-based game that teaches you about family relations, building ties. Second part of the game focus on support, cooperation, especially that it supports cooperation. SimCity, city builders can be also used to discuss urban phenomena. And then the Franz Kafka video game, for example, devoted to a specific person, a writer in this respect, based on which we can discuss the character. And we don't have to limit ourselves to reading books only right now. So all these games and many others, I think, will be discussed during this conference, but there are databases as mentioned here. As you can see, the last one is particularly worth recommending for Polish readers. There are filters there, age filters, so you can find games for younger children, for adults, topic-based filters, and just browse it. I think it's a very dynamic area, and a lot here depends on your own creativity and participating in your students' lives, basically. So it's worth discussing it with them and taking into account their perspective. Thank you very much. I encourage you to contact me and have a great next event during the conference.